9/11 is a collection of two numbers, but it's also a date. It's the date that the world ended, kind of, in a weird allegorical way. You have to appreciate the surreality of, like, after the first plane crash, a lot of people on the ground in New York are thinking that it might have been like an accident, like some kind of like an air traffic mistake or some kind of malfunctioning equipment on the plane. And then the second plane goes in. If you want to engage in a proper analysis of 9/11 and the horrific consequences it has had on the cognitive functionality of the average American, you have to acknowledge the fact that, jokes aside, it was actually a pretty big deal. A really, really, really big deal. One of my favorite pieces of 9/11 related analysis is in the episode done by the podcast Well, There's Your Problem, which talks about quite a lot. And some of the stuff that I'm saying is going to be lightly synthesized from there. There are plenty of places you can go for 9/11 analysis, but I like them and I trust them, and I think that they're a good place to go looking, if you want to get some information on anything related to a disaster, which 9/11 most certainly was. These planes are just melting as they crash into the buildings. Incredible stuff. Look, I know a lot of people who watch me are kind of young, and I mean, I'm also kind of young, but you have to understand. In the 1990s, the world was done. It was over. History was finished, okay? End of history theory. We did it, baby. After the Cold War ended, there was nothing on Earth that even remotely challenged American hegemony. You have to understand, nothing compares to the arrogance of 1990s America. The Cold War was over, Boris Yeltsin was in charge, and he was allowing Western corporations to essentially rape Russia and do whatever we wanted with post-Soviet states. Shock doctrine was in full effect. China had not yet experienced its gigantic economic boom, not to the extent that it later would, with Dengist reforms encouraging market growth to the extent that it would really start booming. So for that time, like in the 90s, we were uncontested. Nothing else even came close. Obviously, the idea of history ending is kind of ridiculous then and in retrospect, but the idea of America being this like untouchable, sort of immovable force of history, I can't really blame the average American for falling into that line of thinking, right? Because you think of the progression of the 20th century, right? You had at the beginning of the 20th century, we were still reeling from the effects of early industrial modernization. We had the Great Depression, we had World War One, not necessarily in that order. We had World War Two, where we fought the biggest war ever, and then won. And then we had the Cold War, and then we won that. And then finally, no one else stood. It was just us. It was just America. And all the other strong countries in the world were our allies. Western Europe was our ally. We were making an effort to bring former Soviet states over to us. It was done. It was over. It really is like the pride before the fall, because that arrogance established the mindset that would be demolished, both literally and figuratively, as Osama bin Hussein Mohammed von Laden personally remote controlled two planes into the World Trade Center towers. Barack Obama, when he did that. Obviously everybody knows that that bin Laden, there was that article written on him after he, as a member of the Mujahideen with American backing, helped oust the Soviets from Afghanistan. There was an article on him like building the road to peace, like he had a sort of personal army that he was like building roads in Sudan, I believe. Western media praised him because at the time, you have to understand, at the time, we didn't think of Muslims as like, the idea of like the civilizational war between the West and Islam. That's a modern thing. That's a post 9/11 thing. Before 9/11, the greatest cultural impact, especially towards the end of the Cold War, that our relationship with the Muslim world, was the most resounding sort of message was the idea that we'd worked with the Mujahideen, we'd worked with the Islamic fighters to push back the Soviets. Obviously, we weren't like allies with the Muslim world or anything like that, but the idea of it being some kind of grand existential battle between our side and theirs just wasn't really it wasn't really a thing. It was more like they were This is very racist, so I hope you'll forgive me for iterating the point accurately, but we basically thought of them as a bunch of disorganized tribesmen with backwards ideas who could be weaponized in our favor, but as long as they could be weaponized in our favor, they were, like noble savages, kind of. That was the idea. Really, that was. Can anyone back me up on that? That was like a commonly held, like, oh, the Muslim world is fierce and the sands are hot, but the Soviet invaders were their back was broken in Afghanistan, and their back really was broken in Afghanistan. It's a testament to the relative strength of the American empire that we occupied Afghanistan for 20 years with basically no negative consequences to our domestic situation, whereas the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan did actually break their back. It was closer to Vietnam for them, and it was worse for them than Vietnam was for us. Yeah, just wow. The Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was a critical error. It was up there with like Hitler deciding to invade Russia. Just not a good idea. But anyway, at the time, our attitude towards the Muslim world, whatever that means, I don't know what that means. Whatever that means, it was kind of varied one. Obviously we'd had our kerfuffles with Iran, Saudi Arabia oil, but the idea of a grand civilizational conflict was not present at the time. We had ourselves a little Gulf War, Bush Senior did a little did some 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 mimetically interesting stuff. Did a little trolling. Used a few a few 100,000 million rounds of depleted uranium on Iraqi armor. I want you you know how, okay, maybe you don't know. Depleted uranium rounds are very spicy. Okay, they're basically demon bullets. They're basically like bullets that we forge in hell. Depleted uranium rounds are insane, and we used, I think, millions of them fighting against the Iraqi army. Now think for a second. Do you think the Iraqi army and its capabilities justify the use of weapons like that? I mean, this would be like deploying a carrier group to intercept somebody who's fishing without a license, I mean, the idea of like, because depleted uranium rounds are expensive, The reason that we went in there, in the Gulf War, and we desert stormed it up. The reason we handled things the way we did is because it was reflective of our attitude in the post Cold War. It was we were on top, and we were uncontested, and we were just, it's made from waste, it's only expensive because it's effective. You understand the point that I'm making here, right? I didn't mean it was $1 million a bullet. I'm saying, like, we used the Gulf War as a sort of a channel for our, at the time, uncontested imperial power in a situation where it was not warranted, The Gulf War was a flex. Yeah, the military doctrine was shock and awe. I mean, Desert Storm. We were literally like blitzkrieging the Iraqi army, and for a bunch of reasons that were it was kind of complicated. Bin Laden didn't like that too much. Also, didn't know about it not being warranted. Saddam had invaded Kuwait. I meant the way in which we handled the conflict. Guys, please follow through with me here. I'm not a historian. I'm just trying to cut through to the basics. We're talking about 9/11. I didn't say the conflict itself. There was nothing there. I just said, like, oh yeah, let's just use millions of depleted uranium rounds on this post-Soviet tech while fighting an army that is so militarily inferior to ours that we probably could have just physically rammed their tanks with our helicopters and still won. Stop trying to prove you're smarter than me. You probably are, okay? I'm just trying to run this through. Oh my God. Anyway, the war happened. Bin Laden was salty about it, okay? Bin Laden was salty about a lot of stuff because Bin Laden correctly believed that the Middle East and the Islamic world broadly had been kind of over by Western imperialism, that American arrogance was endemic of like a broader issue relating to the relationship between, broadly, the West and the Islamic world. Osama bin Laden, wacky guy. After we murked him, we looked at his computer. He had memes of Evangelion, on his computer. Wacky guy, Also, by the way, a super wealthy fail son. If you didn't know, the Bin Laden construction group is one of the wealthiest and most prominent kind of construction facilitation companies that operates in the Middle East. They've got a big family. Osama bin Laden is a derivative of that family. If you're doing, if you're if you're if you're doing something fancy in the Middle East, odds are you're working with the Bin Ladens. You know, we just know the one Bin Laden, the Bin Laden, yeah, the Saudi Bin Laden group, party to a U.S. 3.4 billion agreement to construct the Doha Metro located in Doha. That makes sense. The conglomerate comprises an estimated 537 companies. The group's founder was Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, the father of Osama bin Laden. So we're talking about an actual fail son, you know? Like I like just imagine like if one of the Rockefeller sons like like distances himself from the business, becomes like a Christian extremist, and then goes down to like sub-Saharan Africa to lead like Christian militia groups to establish like you know like apartheid states, or yeah, it'd be like one of Elon Musk's kids like trying to rebuild Rhodesia. I mean it's very strange, but you know, it's not that unbelievable. It's true. Incredible wealth and privilege does rot your brain. Very interesting stuff, you know. What's that one Elon kid, the one with the wacky name that no one can pronounce, you know? That person like travels over to China and becomes like one of the oh, what's the name of that cult in China? You know what I'm talking about. They have that conservative rag here in the States that's anti-China because they're not liked by the Chinese government. The Falun Gong, yeah. It'd be like that child of Elon Musk going over and joining the Falun Gong and like leading like militia revolts in like the countryside of China or something. It's just phenomenal stuff. Anyway, of course, when we think of Bin Laden, we think of Osama bin Laden. But if you want to do any construction work in the Middle East, you know, odds are you're going to at least be referred to them at some point. But you know, Bin Laden, wacky guy, had some wacky ideas. Decided that you know, he'd had enough of American imperialism and was going to you know, stick his nose up at us. He wrote a big manifesto on why he did this. You can read it if you want. A lot of his reasoning is pretty straightforward. I don't agree with it, but it's pretty direct, you know? It has a lot more to do with American imperialism, I think, than it does like Islamic extremism. You know, the media later portrayed this as an act of Islamic terror, which it undeniably is. But the American media never really framed this as what it really was, which was a near inevitable backlash to American imperialism. This was the behavior like this is a consequence of certain sets of material conditions that America crafted with all of the ferocity and authority of a world superpower. And nobody expected things to turn out the way they did, you know. This was, of course, you know, by far like the worst terrorist attack we had ever experienced. You know, one of the worst mass death events that we'd ever experienced. The idea of using a plane in this way as a terrorist was not something that was like taken that seriously, I don't think. Because at the time, usually when planes were hijacked, it would just be like a guy with a derringer would hold up the cockpit and like force you to land at a local rural airport and say, you know, bring me $1 million in cash and I'm going to fly to Cuba and I'll let all the hostages go, you know. Before, plane terrorism was more like, this is now a hostage situation, and you know, the plane is both my hostage vehicle and my getaway vehicle. So the idea of using a plane as just sort of a kinetic rocket to bring down something like the World Trade Center was just not like it wasn't a thing that people thought about. Vaush, you need to clarify. Did you say the 2003 invasion of Iraq motivated bin Laden in 2001? Monty '05. There was another invasion of Iraq, the Gulf War, in response to the Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait beforehand, so orchestrated by Bush's father. No, guys, it's okay. We only talk about one Iraq war these days. He did see into the future. He did use his crystal ball. If I recall correctly, bin Laden himself did not think the towers would collapse completely. Well, to be fair, nobody really had an accurate model for what would happen if you flew a plane of that size into a building. Like, there are things that engineers are expected to build models for, and there are things that they are not, you know? Most planes, go to a skyscraper in New York, all right? Most New York skyscrapers are not going to have detailed engineering plans on how well it would withstand a nuclear detonation within 1 kilometer. The reason for that is because most people accept that if you're building contingencies for events like that, you're kind of f***ed anyway, you know? Skyscrapers are built to withstand light collisions, heavy winds, earthquakes, bombs at their base. Something like a plane crashing into it. That's yeah, yeah. Oh, and to briefly address the controlled demolition, angle. I know this is a deeply unpopular attitude in lefty spaces, and I think this gets expanded upon further in the There's Your Problem podcast episode on the subject. But I don't think there was a controlled demolition, and I don't think 9/11 was planned by Bush. I think that it was allowed to happen through startling interdepartmental incompetence between our intelligence agencies and an incredible degree of arrogance on the part of essentially every American who could have stopped it because we were a world superpower and we just didn't consider anything like this could happen. I think that like it was just like it was the early 2000s, the 90s had just ended. I really think that a lot of the people working, the CIA, the FBI, any of the like State Department agencies that would have overseen threats like this, I really genuinely think that there was an interdepartmental culture of like playing it chill, being asleep at the wheel, because you don't want to be that one hysterical guy who's like, hey, we have evidence that like some of these people associated with bin Laden have gone to a flight school, maybe like he's literally going to like disintegrate a building in downtown New York, I just, yeah, I think, and if you don't think American officials are capable of that degree of incompetence, I would like to refer you to literally anything else American officials have ever done ever, as evidence that they are capable of that degree of incompetence. As for the controlled demolition angle, like, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. It's true, jet fuel doesn't burn crazy hot in open air. Paper can. Paper can melt steel beams. A collision with a plane can bend steel beams and break them. And jet fuel actually can heat steel beams to the point that they weaken significantly, which allows, if there's a heavy weight being supported by those beams, like say 20 stories of a skyscraper, to collapse downward. It's so yeah, no, I don't think there was a controlled demolition. It's an unfeasible conspiracy theory. I think that a lot of people want there to be a conspiracy theory because the idea of America just being vulnerable to those kind of attacks is a threat to the impermeable arrogance that we held during that era. Like, nobody wants to accept that America, as strong and wealthy as we are, we can just have this happen. We can just have, like, New York City, which is functionally, culturally, like, basically America's capital, it can just be disintegrated, like nobody wants to admit that there's no level of power that makes you immune to tragedy. So they want it to be a conspiracy because an inside job, so then it wasn't us being vulnerable. It was actually, it was a plot, There are plenty of legitimate engineering explanations for essentially every part of the 9/11 conspiracy. Building 7, for example, which is the building that seemingly collapsed without a plane actually hitting it. Building 7 had shared architectural faculties with the other towers. Namely, there were architectural supports and parts of the foundation that were directly connected to the other buildings, and the enormous damage done to the towers sort of sent ripples down through the underlying concrete superstructure and all of the associated foundational bearings, and caused enough of a disruption to bring down Building 7 as well. What happened to the Pentagon building? A plane crashed into it. The Pentagon also got itself flown into. There isn't crazy footage of that because there aren't actually like 500 tourists just chilling out outside the Pentagon at all times. By the way, I drove by the Pentagon while visiting DC a couple times. They really do not prepare you for how big that building is. They don't like, you can see photos of it, but you really can't appreciate how large the Pentagon is unless you're nearby. It's unfathomable. It's the largest building I've ever been by far. It's not even close. It's colossal. It's like it's titanic. Yeah, it's like a world wonder. It's insane how big it is. Pentagon 9/11 damage. Yeah, I'll show you the photo. Now, the Pentagon is, of course, an armored building. It's incredibly well armored, you know. So the plane that flew into it, the damage that it did was relatively insubstantial compared to the damage that was done to the Twin Towers, you know. It rammed in here. There's a line here where you can see where the wings kind of like clip the sides. But the center mass of the plane sort of traveled forward like a kinetic torpedo and just took out like a big chunk right here. That's still a lot of damage. Yeah, planes are heavy. Planes are pretty big, actually. You know, armor can only do so much. Wasn't one plane supposed to hit the White House? I think so, yeah. I don't think there's any way a plane could hit the White House, though. I think the air defenses around the White House are wacky. I think they're wacky. I think they're they're pretty crazy. Yeah. They have some goofy air defenses around the Capitol, and they're only goofier now. Oh, they're much goofier now. How do you stop a plane from hitting you? Honest to God, with the security beef-ups that we saw after 9/11, I have a feeling that if a plane tried to get close to the White House, they would just activate the teleporter beam and just transport it into the sun. They would dodge. They would activate the boost thrusters on the sides of the White House to dodge out of the way of the thrust vectoring on these like hidden rocket canisters that they have all over the building. It would just stand up and mecha fight the plane. The plane crash is an inflatable decoy. Yeah, maybe that's why people weren't so worried about the January 6th riot. It's because that wasn't the real Capitol building. It was actually a giant hologram with holographic senators and stuff inside of it. The real Capitol building is like in the Earth's core or something. I don't know. Listen, okay, wait. Let's get back to the gravitas of the situation. Okay. Whoa, 9/11. It's actually a huge tragedy, guys. Like 3,000 people died. Oh, if you watch the well, there's your problem podcast episode, you can hear about how incompetence on the part of New York City's officials and cheap lowest bid deals on equipment for their first responders is one of the reasons why so many police officers and firefighters got killed. Like it was like, you know, here's some $5 Fisher Price radios. Here's the worst terrorist attack in human history. Good luck, you know, that kind of stuff. Interesting stuff if you want, you know, examples on how austerity and capitalism can cripple a city's ability to manage its own affairs. And another element of the 9/11 tragedy that goes completely unaddressed. You know, the media doesn't talk about imperialism. The media doesn't talk about the effect that like cheap skinflinting on the part of the city budget, you know, what that actually did, how that elevated the death toll. You know, people are willing to cheer for the first responders, but, you know, investigate why the first responders died so much. And it's like, you know. So 9/11 happened. It wasn't great. A lot of people died. It basically rendered a huge portion of New York City inoperable due to a marauding cloud of dust and cancer that just sort of orbited the city. Incredibly traumatic event for a lot of people. I occupy a sort of Schrodinger space of simultaneously being very willing and able to make fun of 9/11 and make jokes, but also being like pretty respectful to how bad it actually was, you know? I think when people make jokes about 9/11, we're mostly making jokes about how culturally dominant 9/11 became and all the insane shit that was justified because of 9/11. Like, I don't think people would make jokes about 9/11 if it weren't for the never forget, make it a national holiday, also let's invade Iraq, you know, stuff, you know? So a lot of it is kind of like a contempt for that attitude, I think. But I want to talk about that attitude, okay? I want to talk to the Zoomers. Now, I'm barely old enough to remember this, but like 9/11 broke the brain of America. It is impossible for me to explain or describe accurately and to the fullest possible extent how much 9/11 broke America's brain. You're talking about a level of cultural arrogance that was on par with like the height of the Roman Empire. And then this happened. you know? And this happened in an era where tragedy can be multiplied. You know, the effects of tragedy can be multiplied substantially through the potential of the weapons that we use now. You know, like it's not like the, you know, like a setting fire to London or something where, you know, you can just have a baker leave the oven on overnight. The conceptual like terror of like just a plane can crash into a skyscraper and just like change the world. And it did change the world. Like that's just not something that people thought, you know? And to go from the incredible height of arrogance that Americans held down to the post 9/11 situation was just the whiplash broke everyone's brain. Real, genuine brain damage. You can see it in an MRI. Do MRIs measure your brain? I forget which ones measure your brain. You can see it in a fancy doodad. Okay, there's real brain damage, as evidenced by this. I want you to imagine what would have to happen in America today for presidential approval ratings for a person like George W. Bush to do this. For anyone. I want you to imagine 90% of Americans approving of any president. It's not possible. It can't happen. In the world today, in America today, it is not possible for 90% of Americans to approve of any one single president. It cannot happen. It is not possible. It doesn't matter how competent they are. Another 9/11 would do it? I don't think so. If another 9/11 would just lead to both parties blaming the other, I think. Or more accurately, the Republican Party would blame the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party would try to work through it, but then the Republican Party would legitimately make things worse, and the Democratic Party would point it out. And no, I don't think it's possible. The post 9/11 cultural swamp was, I think, for anyone who was alive and sort of aware at the time, you can agree with me, maybe like the worst cultural state in American history. Because immediately after 9/11, the aesthetic of patriotism was not only omnipresent, but mandatory. If you were not a flag-waving American, like you were with the terrorists. That's not a joke. Like that's an actual thing. Like it was political suicide to not be a jingoistic like nationalist. Interpersonally, like you had to be oorahing, let's get the terrorist. Freedom fries, you know, because we were angry that the French were, you know, with us the Iraq war. We, you know, basically all popular culture shifted into being a virtue signal for the extent to which you personally loved America, you know? And this took so many forms. I mean, this was from like the like country music about how, you know, we'll put a boot in their ass, it's the American way, you know, like everyone's seen that Lindsay Ellis video on post 9/11 musical trends, you know. But I think like it really is kind of like a cultural black hole. In a way, it almost makes The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, a lot more prescient because Agent Smith describes America at the turn of the millennium as the height of human culture. And shortly after that movie came out, 9/11 happened. And I think he was right because 9/11 was a cultural pit that we never recovered from, by the way. We never actually got over it. It's still happening right now. All American politics today are almost like are like completely dictated by the legacy of 9/11 and by the cultural trauma of being on top of the world and then being reminded that we were still vulnerable, you know? Everything that we do is motivated by the fear and anxiety that was instilled in every American when we were reminded that no degree of like no level of power can actually like sate it can never actually protect us. And I think like that's the real reason that the Iraq war happened. That's like the real reason everything happened, you know? I think that's one of the reasons that the idea of America as the world's police like really ramped up, because immediately after the end of the Cold War, I don't think America world police was as common of an attitude. It was more like, now that the Cold War is over, we can finally build relations with the rest of the world. We were like the peacekeepers. We weren't, of course, but that's what we thought of ourselves as. Like, after the Cold War ended, like, now it's time for us to all build the world back together, you know? But after 9/11, I think that kind of ended, and we just kind of, the whole like police, the world police attitude ramped up, I think, because I think even if people didn't want to like say it out loud, I think that they, what a lot of people really believed was that for a lot of the world, especially the Muslim world, like, the only tolerable world is one in which they live under our boot. Like, 9/11 can't be allowed to happen again, and the only way to prevent it from happening again is to exert essentially limitless and unmitigated control over the future of the world. Every corner of the world has to be broken and brought into line. Everything, every square inch of the planet has to be brought in line. And that attitude, it cultivates this culture of fear and anxiety that has just never gone away. You cannot get through a political speech these days, especially from the Republicans, but I mean broadly, without there being some, at the very least, underlying implicit degree of cultural anxiety concerning America's place in the world. Or if it's the Republicans, like an explicit, you know, like, we got to beat China, like that kind of thing, you know? But even when the Democrats talk, we don't build our economy up for its own sake. We're competing with China, right? Like, we don't want anyone to be able to hurt us ever again. Now, it should be noted that this is an incredibly toxic and arrogant attitude to have towards world affairs. There is no level of power America can achieve that makes it impossible for people to commit terrorist attacks against us. We put forward the Patriot Act. We have instigated one of the most egregious and wide-reaching violations of our civil rights ever, by allowing / enabling the mass surveillance of our communications. We've given the government an incredible amount of power to control and regulate our behavior. The TSA is a fucking nightmare. The Department of Homeland Security is a fucking nightmare. We were more fearful than ever before. And I want you to remember, by the way, that all of this insane control that we exert over our population now is post-Cold War. That is to say, back when we were fighting the Soviets, back when America literally had Soviet spies in it, back when our main antagonist was a nuclear power that could have ended the world just as easily as us, that literally had spies in America, and we had spies over there, at that time, when there was a real threat, we didn't have anything even remotely close to what that era's technological equivalent of the Patriot Act would have been. We didn't have the Department of Homeland Security, and we didn't have the TSA. You could just board an airplane while carrying a bunch of gallon jugs with opaque plastic concealing the material inside, you know? You could just walk onto a plane with a bomb vest, and they'll be like, oh, you know, don't use that while you're on the plane. You'd be like, won't. And those were the days, you know? Those were the days. I'm only half joking. We were up against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, which was well regarded for its intelligence capabilities, with its map making and its spy mastering, and we still didn't engage in the level of self-surveillance that we do today, even though the threat of nuclear war was infinitely, incomparably worse than anything that Islamic terrorists could do against us. But 9/11 broke us, and now we're permanently fearful, and now our fear is going to dictate every element of our foreign policy and our domestic culture, I guess forever. I think it's just a forever thing now. It might take like 3 generations. Ignore that, I hit the enter key. It might take like 3 generations to get through. Like everyone might just have to die off until nobody remembers 9/11, you know? That might actually be what it takes. Does everyone who's watching, do you understand what I'm trying to get at here? This is what I mean when I say the world ended. Like, 9/11 killed a couple thousand people, which is peanuts compared to a lot of disasters that have happened historically. Not to say it's not bad, it certainly is, but like, you know, the world didn't end every time several thousand people died. But 9/11 really did freeze America, and therefore, like, broadly the West, in an attitude that has not only crippled our ability to grow and move forward, but is actually rotting us away at the core. It's more an America thing than a West thing broadly, but America's cognitive deficiencies do kind of drag along the rest of what we consider the West, unfortunately. You can't fully divorce yourself from the impact and effect of American culture. The UK is very much like us in this respect. Yes, that is true. To what extent did America deserve it? It's kind of it's a dumb question, Hassan Memer. When we say, like, did the Americans who died deserve it? Like, no, they were random fucking civilians. You know, of course they didn't deserve it. Did America as, like, a nation, as an imperial power, bring about the conditions which led to this? Absolutely. Was it our arrogance and our myopic unwillingness to acknowledge our vulnerability? Like, did these lead to it? Absolutely. So you can point to American incompetence. You can point to, like, American arrogance. You know, whether it deserved is kind of like a moral statement. Like, is the world a better place because 9/11 happened? Like, what did we get our just desserts? Was justice enacted? And the answer for that is absolutely not. The world is an unimaginably worse place as a product of 9/11. Not just for the deaths that happened, but for everything that followed. In fact, I would say the greatest tragedy of 9/11 is not, in fact, itself, the event, but everything that has, come after. In a lot of ways, 9/11 truly was the burning of the Reichstag for America, wasn't it? You know? Shame to see a building like that go up in flames. Now watch what we're going to do with that as a pretext. Of course, the burning of the Reichstag actually was a false flag, and I don't think 9/11 was, so you'll have to ignore that possible comparison. But the analogy that I am trying to draw here is that, you have a tragedy that's used as a pretext to justify a lot of really bad stuff. In the case of the burning of the Reichstag, it was, of course, the Nazis, which who weren't good. That was bad. The Zoomies in chat don't understand the sheer level of Islamophobia after 9/11. Oh yeah, I didn't even want to get to that because it's so fucking depressing, but you can't recount post 9/11 culture without, like, at least acknowledging the fact that if you were Muslim in America, basically overnight you went from being treated like fine as a minority group, like, not good, don't get me wrong, there was plenty of discrimination against Muslims beforehand, but, like, sort of more latent, more passive racism. 9/11 happened, and then holy shit, you could just do or say whatever the fuck you wanted to Muslim people. Like, right then, Like, Muslim kids in school would be bullied, or like, wow, you have a bomb vest? Do you have a bomb vest? Like, people would lose their jobs. People would be hate crimed in the streets. Like Muslim, like, food-related restaurants, like Arab food or whatever, would be, like, trashed, rocks thrown through the window, they'd be lit on fire, Mosques would be trashed or graffiti. And this didn't just happen over a couple of weeks. This went on for years. Hate crimes against Muslims still haven't returned to pre-9/11 levels in America, as I understand it. It never went away. No, not just... Okay, everyone rushes to say not just Muslims, but also the Sikhs, but I don't know why that's, like, the most important. Like, it was overwhelming against Muslims, yeah, but Americans are stupid, and they say anyone with a turban, and they're going to think, oh, yeah, that's a Muslim, Yes, it was also directed against basically everyone with brown skin. Indians got hit with it. Sikhs got hit with it. Like, a lot of people got hit with it. Because Americans see, like, Muslim-esque people. Hindus? Yeah, fucking Hindus. Yeah, no, literally, like, just a lot of people. If people want to know how much 9/11 broke people's brains, just look at Frank Miller. Ah, yes, Frank Miller. Frank Miller, who wrote the Dark Knight Returns, widely considered to be one of the best comics ever written. And then after 9/11 happened, he wanted to make a story of Batman going into, like, Afghanistan and killing Muslims. And when DC wouldn't let him use Batman to kill Muslims, he just made an independent comic called Holy Terror, which was just about killing Muslims, who are all, of course, like, fully cloth-clad, like, insane, like, Durka Muhammad Jihad, like, lunatic Islamist fundamentalists that are like Punisher-esque protagonist is bringing righteous justice to. Yeah, this is the brain damage of Frank Miller. You know, you can read this graphic novel if you want. I have. It sucks. It's really bad. It's not. Frank Miller was one of the best comic writers in history. You know, I wonder what happened to his brain. Literally, if you look up like "Holy Terror" Frank Miller on Google image search, every single frame is like everything you would think it is. So here's, I guess, just one action frame, and of course, both of the men he's shooting have both guns and bomb vests, because that's a thing that terrorists do. They train people to use guns, give them munitions and guns, and then also give them bomb vests just in case. That's a thing that's been known to happen. I guess you don't want to complicate it with the fact that generally the people who wear bomb vests are like children or women, because the terrorists will like threaten their families or whatever, and it's like, here, blow up this airport, we won't kill your family, and then they kill their family anyway. And I guess like Frank Miller didn't want to draw like our edgy protagonist gunning down 8-year-olds like with broken noses, like wearing bomb vests. Horrific fun fact: hate crimes against Muslims went up by over 1,000%. Yeah, no, yeah, like seriously, it was basically, I'm not joking when I say like it was kind of like a soft pogrom. Like it was in a soft. I don't mean this in like the greatest possible sense. Like in the softest sense, it was kind of like a soft ethnic cleansing. Not in the sense that mass graves were being dug, but like a broader effort was made to fully just excise everything and everyone Muslim or Muslim looking from America and American culture. It never went all the way up to concentration camps and mass graves, so, you know, that wasn't present, but like there was a real fucking effort to just not have them here anymore. You know? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Was there much reason to do hate crimes prior? Well, I don't think there's ever a reason to do hate crimes. But if you're asking whether or not there was like a cultural pretext for anti-Muslim violence beforehand, the best example that I can probably think of was like the gas crisis in the 70s, maybe pigeon. The gas crisis, the gas shortage, and probably the embassy standoff when the the Iranian hostage situation. That was probably the worst of it, right? In terms of like reasons Americans would want to lynch Muslims, that was probably like the big thing that happened recently. At that time, my mom is Muslim, and I remember my mom didn't want to go outside after the terrorist attack in France in 9/11. Yeah. By the terrorist attack in France, do you mean the Hebdo thing? When that comic office got shot up? No, I think they meant the club. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, it's been known to happen. Islamic extremism is a real thing. It's just it mostly affects Muslims, you know? Like, where's the Taliban? Afghanistan. Where's ISIS? Currently, like, nowhere, actually. They are pretty dead. But where was ISIS? You know, Iraq, Syria. Like, you know, the victims of Islamic extremism are overwhelmingly, like, you know, Muslims. Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda isn't really operating anymore, is it? I think there are some cells of Al-Qaeda that are doing some work, but I don't think Al-Qaeda has anywhere near the level of, like, power and prominence that they did before. It has branches in Salamia, Syria, stuff like that. Yeah, I think they've kind of branched out. I don't know how relevant they are. ISIS was kind of like a spark in the pan. I just fucking read Salamia out loud. I know, I'm very tired. ISIS was like the attempt to create a jihadist state, which was wild. You know, you really can like 99% of Islamic extremism can be explained by like their own psychotic reactions to American imperialism. We've been talking about the brain damage of America for a bit, but keep in mind, like, you know who has a much better excuse for their brain damage? Like any fucking Muslim living in like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, what like their pretext for brain damage is way more developed, and a lot of that brain damage does manifest in the form of you know, wanting to put on a bomb vest and you know, disintegrate a small crowd of civilians in a market, you know, or gun down infidels or whatever. The purpose of ISIS was to create a new caliphate, an Islamic state. And the goal of that Islamic state was in part to create like a real geopolitical opponent to American imperialism. Of course, it was a doomed venture. That was never going to happen. It was simply not possible. Even if it was possible, it would be a bad thing because ISIS is really bad. They're very not good. They're not great. Look up Ashcroft versus Iqbal. It's basically a case that determined whether or not the state had to bother with habeas corpus for Muslim-looking people. I remember hearing about this. Ashcroft versus Iqbal was a U.S. Supreme Court case which held plaintiffs must present a plausible course of action. Alongside Bell Atlantic Corps versus Twombly, Iqbal raised the threshold with plaintiffs needed to meet. Further, the court held that government officials not liable for the actions of their subordinates without evidence that they ordered the allegedly discriminatory activity. At issue is whether current and former federal officials, including FBI Director Mueller, hey, that guy would end up being important to my channel in the future, and former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft, were entitled to qualified immunity against an allegation they knew of or condoned racial and religious discrimination against Muslim men detained after the 9/11 attacks. The decision also transformed civil litigation in the federal courts by making it much easier for courts to dismiss individual suits. On the morning of September 11th, Javed Iqbal, a Pakistani-American cable television installer, was in Lower Manhattan when the World Trade Center was attacked. He'd been on his way to renew his work authorization card as he was an immigrant and did not yet have permanent citizenship. In an initially unrelated action 8 weeks later, he was arrested on charges of conspiracy to defraud the U.S. and fraud in relation to identification documents, and he was placed in pretrial detention at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. When officers searched his apartment, they found the card for an apartment to be downtown on 9/11, as well as media reporting on the attacks, and suspected him of involvement. Iqbal alleged that FBI officials carried out a discriminatory policy by designating him as a person of high interest in the investigation of the September 11 attacks because of his race, religion, and national origin. He asserted it was because of his identity as a Pakistani Muslim that he was placed in the detention center's Administrative Maximum Special Housing Unit for over 6 months while he was awaiting the fraud trial. So here's the issue, okay? Just putting it up front, all right? I think that degrees of discrimination are going to be present in investigation. Treatment, they cannot be. So, for example, if there is a 9/11 happens, you know, and there are people who are arrested of other crimes against the United States nearby who have only been here recently and they're Muslim, looking into their association with the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I think is a reasonable thing to do, for the simple reason that, you know, the 9/11 terrorist attacks were definitely kind of a little bit smidgen of a Muslim-y thing. A little bit. However, the problem is when we go beyond investigation, which is a thing that you do without affecting the life of the person being investigated. If you want to investigate on that pretext, that's one thing, you know. You can, you know, look into whatever facts you want behind the scenes. However, being placed in the Administrative Maximum Special Housing Unit, not even because of charges being brought against you, but because of your fucking religion and ethnicity, just because you're adjacent to an investigation taking place, that is when it goes beyond investigation and goes into just flat out, like, full-on discrimination. Huge difference. While he was awaiting the fraud trial. See, he was on trial for fraud. It wasn't like he'd been charged with anything associated with terrorism. If he'd been charged with it, if there was a pretext for that charge, then maybe an argument... No, well, frankly, an argument couldn't be made anyway because we don't live in fucking 24 universe. And just because you're associated with a terrorist attack doesn't mean that you're going to get busted out of a fucking prison cell, because that's not the way the world works. So, no, even then you wouldn't need to be in your fucking Administrative Maximum Special Housing Unit, which sounds like something that should be reserved for, like, captured X-Men or something. Jesus Christ. Iqbal asserted he was tortured by prison staff on the orders of and under policies written by John Ashcroft. Specifically, he claimed that on that day he was transferred to the special unit prison guards without provocation, picked him up and threw him against the wall, kicked him in the stomach, punched him in the face, dragged him across the room. He testified that he was being attacked a second time and sought medical attention but was denied care for 2 weeks. Further, Iqbal asserted that prison staff in the special unit subjected him to unjustified strip and body cavity searches, verbally berated him by calling him a terrorist and Muslim killer, refused to give him adequate food, subjected him to extreme heat and cold. Further, he stated that prison staff interfered with his attempts at prayer, to engage in religious study, and his access to counsel. And the conclusion. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court reversed the Second Circuit's decision that the plaintiff had pleaded sufficient facts. The Supreme Court held Iqbal's complaint failed to plead sufficient facts to state a claim of purposeful and unlawful discrimination. The Supreme Court upheld that this guy did not have a legal claim. The Second Circuit's decision was to defend this guy, and the Supreme Court stepped in after the appeal. If you want to know more about this case, there's a 5-4 podcast episode on it. Strongly recommend you give it a listen. It's worse than we're going over here. Don't skip the worst part of the case. Look at the date of the case. Yeah, this took place in 2009. So, 8 years after 9/11, the Supreme Court stepped in to helpfully add that actually it's not like this was a fucking rush trial or whatever. You know, this guy was Iqbal was released in January 2003 because he used another guy's social security card. While in prison, his wife divorced him, thus invalidating his green card. Iqbal was deported to Pakistan. Upon his return to Pakistan, he was branded an American agent. His son was persecuted and forcibly disappeared as a result. After being released, Iqbal brought claims under implied cause of action established by Bivens versus 6 unnamed agents for violation of... Is there any reason to keep the SCOTUS in any form? I mean, we just have to stop treating it like it's like an apolitical institution or whatever. Like a lot of the people on the Supreme Court are partisan monsters who are every bit as influenced by bias as people like Trump. They just know how to dress it up in legalese. They're wizards, okay? They're court wizards. Their job is essentially to translate the doctrine of their party into legalese to give it like legal pretext and justification. That's it. They're high priests. They interpret the word of the founding fathers. Yeah, the basic logic of this case essentially is that the guy's claim was too vague for him to like receive damages, you know? It's too like, you know, basically like saying, "Hey, I've been treated to discrimination and torture by basically every element of this institution." That's too vague. You can't. Yeah, that's too vague, sorry. You need a specific person, and also you better hope they don't have qualified immunity, and also you better hope that they aren't being exonerated of their behavior because they were given orders by a superior officer, and also you better hope that there weren't other like legal justifications. Soter went on in their dissent to say the main fallacy in the majority's position was grown that they are looking at Iqbal's allegations in isolation and not as a unit. Furthermore, Iqbal was alleging not only that Ashcroft and Mueller had allowed the discriminated policy, but it also created it. Yeah. The impact. The decision has been described as possibly the most consequential ruling in Chief Justice John Roberts' 10-year tenure. 10-year tenure. That's tough to say. Because it has transformed civil litigation in the federal courts to the detriment of individuals. It is one of the 5 most cited Supreme Court decisions of all times. It has been cited as of 2017 over 85,000 times. Every one of those citations is a lower court applying this same standard to their own case. Every single time it's been cited. Well, not every single time, but many of the times it's been cited. It's a lower court going, "Oh, hey, see the Supreme Court saying, F you, eat shit? Well, haha, F you, eat shit." It has made it harder for civil rights cases to proceed through the federal judiciary. Writing in 2017, Stanford law professor argued the case mostly ignored the real center of the case, Iqbal himself. Sinar noted the court generalized Iqbal as a suspect and a foreigner and failed to take in the human dimension of the case. She went on to write, "Oh, that's a common trend with the Supreme Court as well, is that fucking contempt of individuality. The only time the Supreme Court gives a shit about individual rights is when they're talking about cops. Outside of that, like, they are happy to like disregard legal claims or delegitimize them by grouping plaintiffs into whatever categories they think would grant them a lower level of legal protection." She went on to write that the court's decision in Iqbal is in many ways discriminatory, really, and the court ignored a true and serious problem around post-9/11 detentions. Many arrests were made on the basis of ethnicity, nationality, religion, and suspects were jailed under inhumane conditions despite their innocence. Sinar concluded the seemingly obtuse tweak to the rules of civil procedure from the case has had a disparate impact on plaintiffs since. Ontologically evil. Yeah, I wonder how Javaid Iqbal is doing right now, because arrested, tortured, discriminated against, sent back to Pakistan, wife divorces him, His son is forcibly disappeared by the government as he's branded an American agent. If he hasn't killed himself by now, then I think that's a testament, like, to a remarkable amount of perseverance. Okay, so it turns out there's another Javed Iqbal, a Pakistani serial killer and pederast who confessed to the sexual abuse and murder of 100 young boys. This is a different guy. The first name is spelled different. That's why it says serial killer. Disambiguation. Just, yeah. Yeah, died 1 month after 9/11. Wait, hold on. Somebody could make a conspiracy theory out of this. Maybe this was the Javed Iqbal who collaborated in the terror plot, and when he was arrested, he died, and they got another Javed Iqbal on trumped-up fraud charges, and the whole thing proceeded with him. Yeah, we can do some QAnon shit here. Read how they killed him, holy moly. Well, it says he died by suicide before any sentence could be carried out. Oh, you mean how he killed the little boys. Strangled, cut into 100 pieces in front of the parents of the victims, dissolved into acid. Yeah, he seemed like a bad guy. Wow. What a namesake. I think we learned a lot of interesting stuff today about how 9/11 was bad. There are 2 links. I saw the other one. That's not him. We certainly did learn that today. I think he's probably dead. He's probably dead. He's probably dead. And we never recovered.